Okay, B10, midpoint formula, find the endpoint. If you're going to take the ACT, like I said in B9, there will be either a B9 or a B10 question on the ACT. It's a stronger possibility that you'd have one of these than in B9, but I have seen both. But I've seen more B10s than I've seen B9s. Okay, let's see what's happening. Says VW has a midpoint at M57. The M just stands for midpoint, okay? So the midpoint's at 57. Point W is at 54. Find the coordinates of point V. So like in B9, on the first one, I drew what's going on. This will probably be the only time that I draw this out. But so we have VW. W is at an endpoint. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, somewhere around there. I don't have enough space, so I'm just kind of estimating it. So this is W, and it is at 5, 4. M, which is the midpoint, is at 5, 7. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So this is the midpoint, and it's at 5, 7. The question is, find the coordinates of point V. Well, if M is the midpoint, then that's in the middle of W and V, so W has to be up here. And we want to know where here is. So on this one, it's one of the easier ones. We want the X and the Y. Well, since we went over 5 to get to W and we went over 5 to get to M, we're going to go over 5 to get to V. Basically, I'm saying if two of these are the same, if both x's are the same, the other x is going to be the same also. Okay, so we are halfway there. Now we just have to find the y. Well, if we went from 4 to 7, that is 3. So if m is in the midpoint, then this right here would be 3 also. So from 7 to up 3 from 7, we would end at 10. So that's how you would do it in a coordinate plane, but I don't suggest doing that every single time because the problems are going to get harder. Now let me show you how I would do it for the most part until we get to some that just you may need to do a little bit of algebra with. Okay, so what I do on these when I'm finding the endpoint, now midpoint is totally opposite. You add them up, you divide by 2, and you're finished. On this one, it's a little bit more complicated. So I like to separate them. I like to separate the x's and the y's. So I make just a number line for each one. And remember, m is the midpoint. Okay, and so the midpoint is at 5, 7. So the x of the midpoint is at 5, and the y of the midpoint is at 7. W, this is x and this is y. Well, the x for W didn't change. So, this is W also. But the y for W is at 4. Here's y. Which side of 4 is from 7? This side. And remember, it's an endpoint, so I'm going to put 4 at the end. So what I'm looking for is this endpoint. So from 4 to 7 is 3, and if m is at the midpoint, then if this is 3, then this is 3. So if I go 7 and 3, I would be at 10. So there's our 5, and there is our 10. So don't suggest doing it this way. This is just a visual. For the most part, I would do it this way, but in just a little bit, they may be even a little bit harder. So I'm going to show you the math way of doing it, the algebra way. And so if you remember, x1 plus x2 divided by 2 will give you the midpoint of x. That'll be your x midpoint. So if I put, these are your endpoints, x1, so if I put 5 there, we don't know the second endpoint, but we know that we will always divide by 2, and then we'd get the midpoint. The midpoint, the x for midpoint is 5. Okay, so how do we do this? The last thing to get 5 is I divided by 2. So if you're going to undo it, you're going to multiply by 2. So if I multiply this side by 2, I would get rid of those. But what you do to one side, you got to do the other. So I'd multiply this side by 2. So I'd be left with 5 plus x2. 5 times 2 is 10. To get x by itself, you'd subtract 5. So our second endpoint of x is 5, which is 5. Now y, same thing, y1 plus y2 equal, or divided by 2, equals the midpoint of y. The endpoint that they give us is 4. We don't know the second y, but we would divide by 2 and get our midpoint of y, which is 7. You will always multiply by the 2, so the top stays the same. 2 times 7 is 14. Subtract 4, so 14 minus 4 is 10, and I got 10. So that is 3 different ways of getting that answer. I'm not going to do all 3 ways every single time. I'm going to do this most of the time. Okay, so we're at x and we have y. Any better? I think that's better if I do that. Maybe. We'll see. Okay, midpoint. The midpoint is 7, 6. So I'm going to put a 7 there and a 6 here. K is an endpoint and L is an endpoint. K is at 10, 6. 10 is on this side of 7, and 6 stay the same. So I am finished with my y because it didn't move. So the only question is, where is this one? So it's pretty much the same thing as what we had here. It's just the opposite. What's the distance from 7 to 10? 3. So that length's going to be 3. So 7 minus 3 is 4. Okay. X, Y, you're given the midpoint of 6, 5. So that's 6 and that's 5. B is at 2, 10. So the X of B is 2, and 2 is on this side of 10. Your Y's, I'm sorry, this 2 is on this side of 6. Okay. 10 is on this side of 5. So we're looking for this number, and we're looking for this number. Distance from 2 to 6 is 4, so that would be 4. So if I'm at 6 and I went 4 more, then I'd be at 10. So 10 would be your answer. Distance from 5 to 10 is 5, so that would be 5. If I'm going this way from 5, I would be at 0. Okay. Okay. This is a -8, and that's a -10. So we have x with -8 in the middle, y with 7 in the middle, X is negative 10, Y is positive 10. Where is negative 10 to 8? It's on this side. Where's 10 to 7? On this side. So we are looking for those two. It's not always going to be these two. It just happened to be both of them on this list, on these two problems. So from negative 8 to negative 10 is 2 spaces. The length is 2. So this would be 2. So if I go 2 up from negative 8, I would be at negative 6. And we've already done this one a couple of times. This one's 3, that one's 3, so that's 4. So our answer would be negative 6, positive 4. Okay. Nope, this one. Okay, so they're both positive. $11, 19.5. T is at this side of 4. 20 is on this side of 19.5. If we subtract these, we find the distance. So that would be 7. So that would be 7, and 11 plus 7 would be 18. If we subtract these, we find the distance, and it'd be 0.5. If we're going smaller, we subtract them again, and we'd be at 19. $5 and negative 7.5. 19 is on this side of 5. Positive 5 is on this side of 5, or on this side of negative 7.5. So this time we're looking for both smaller numbers. To find the distance, we subtract. 19 minus 5 is 14. So that would be 14. Then we would subtract these. So 5 minus 14 would be negative 9. Okay, I'm going to redo that so I can show you what I'm actually going to do on this one. So we did 19 minus 5 to get 14. Excuse me, 14. To get the distance, you always subtract bigger minus smaller. So that would be 14. If I'm looking for a smaller number, then I would do 5 minus 14 and end up at negative 9. So I'm going to do the same thing here. I'm trying to get that glare off. I think I'm just going to write right here. So to get the distance, you do bigger minus smaller. So the subtraction sign is because we're finding the distance. This negative sign is because 7.5 was negative. But if you subtract a negative, you'll end up with a positive. So in this case, we're actually going to add them. 5 plus 7 is 12, so this would be 12.5. If that's 12.5, then this is 12.5. To get the smaller number, we take the bigger number and subtract the distance and end up with negative 20. Okay. Now, that's about as hard as it should be doing these kind of problems. Now we're just going to keep doing it the algebra way because the numbers are so far apart and it can be quite confusing. So for these and the decimals and stuff like that, I suggest using the formula. Okay. This is your end point. 65 is your end point. We don't know the second end point, but we know that we're going to divide by 2 and get the midpoint of negative 3.5. To undo, we always multiply by 2. So 65 negative 7. 2 times negative 3.5 is negative 7. Subtract 65. Since the 7 is negative and the 65 is negative, we're going to actually add them and keep the negative. The first endpoint of y is negative 53. We don't know the second endpoint, but we will divide by 2 and we'll get the midpoint, which is negative 7.5. Multiply by 2 and get negative 15. Add the 53. Since 53 is bigger than 15, and one's positive, one's negative, we're going to subtract them. So 53 minus 15. I got to think about it. 38. Okay. Negative, negative, negative. X1 plus X2 divided by 2 will give us our midpoint of X. Y1 plus Y2 divided by 2 will give us a midpoint of Y. So 0.1 plus we don't know divided by 2 will give us negative 4.35. Let's go ahead and set this one up. Negative 16.4 plus we don't know divided by 2 equals negative 15.8. You always multiply by 2. Oh goodness. Negative 8.7. Multiply by 2. Negative 31.6. Subtract the 0.1. Subtract the 0.1. Our X is negative 8.8. Add 16.4. Add 16.4. And we get negative 15.2. Please ask questions if you need help. Have fun.